Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my horror gallery. I am Mother Delamort, and this is my horror gallery. I know most of you guys are familiar with me, but if you are new, let us know where you're from and say hello. We always like new victims here in the crypt. We're going to let everybody get a little bit of time to get in here because I know some of the notifications are a little slow. I hope you are having a fine, fine summer and it is not too balmy in the area that you are in. It's been rather hot here where Mother Delamort lives, so I have been staying underground for the most part. But I'm going to see what's going on in the comments real quick while we wait for everybody to file in here and find your seat, turn out the light, and lock your door. We've got an interesting one for you tonight. I think you'll enjoy it. But let's just see what's going on here in the chats real quick. All right, so we've got quite a few people in here already. Hi, Stephen P. Kitty Cat. So glad you are here. So Stephen P. Kitty Cat is on vacation in Lord knows where. He won't tell us. I guess that's a secret that him and the home office are keeping. But I am sure that it involves drinks with really nice little umbrellas. And hopefully he's got his all four paws in the sand somewhere. So have fun on your vacation, Stephen P. Kitty Cat. Let's see. John is here. Hi, John. So glad you're here. Hope you enjoy tonight's show. It's going to be a good one. Hi, Connor. How are you? Thank you. Thank you for being here. And then Sven is here, and he says, "Hi there, Mother. Longest time." It is, but I did see you the other night on, I believe it was a Ka and Hexus' show, or it may have been Roots Bleed Red. But I am so glad you are here. All right, so oh, and there's Nadine. Hey Nadine, how are you? And let's see. And then Connor says, all right. I'm glad you are. I'm glad you're doing well. Hi, Genevieve. How are you? For one of my fellow dark history lovers, I hope you will like tonight's show. Definitely stick around. We've got a couple of different stories that we're going to go over, and they do all seem to somewhat, and I'll pull it together, revolve around the Malleus Maleficarum. And we'll get into what that is for anybody that's not sure what that is. And Michael's here. Hi, Michael. How are you? And I really appreciate you guys joining me tonight. Again, the best way to support your favorite streamers is just to share their content. It's absolutely free. It doesn't cost you a dime. Of course, we do have places if you would like to donate to help with back-scene running of the crypt and all the PBDC TV stuff. We do have links on our website if you'd like to do that as well. And I'm going to go ahead and get the legal mumbo jumbo out of the way before we get started. So, notwithstanding the provisions of Section 106 and 106A, the fair use of copyright work, including such use by reproduction in copies or phonorecords or by any other means specified by that section for the purpose such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, which includes multiple copies for classroom use, scholarship, or research, is not an infringement of copyright. So there, we've got that out of the way. All right, let me get to where I need to be, and we will go ahead and we will get started. All right, so before we get to what the title of my episode was about tonight, we really need to talk a little bit about folklore and superstition. So folklore and superstition, what is it really? Where does it come from and why do we have it? From the time we humans crawled from our caves and looked up into the night sky, we have looked for explanations of things that we have no answers for. Whether it's the unexplained or simply cautionary tales to keep our offspring safe from the dangers of the world, plainly put, folklore and superstition is about and has been formed by human fear. And superstition itself dictates a remedy for those fears. Whether it be a lucky rabbit's foot, a four-leaf clover, Xing out a black cat when it crosses your path, or the thousands of other remedies that we believe will protect us from harm and keep us safe. Even in our modern world, where science can explain many things we once thought to be unexplainable and mysterious and maybe even magic, Folklore and superstition is so deeply ingrained in the human psyche itself, we still often to this day find ourselves unwilling to tempt fate. Whether it be throwing salt over our left shoulder, don't step on a crack, and whatever you do, do not walk under a ladder. So, and to today's standards, those really just seem just kind of silly, like silly old wives' tales. But that was not always the case. You have to ask yourself, what happens when folklore and superstition remain unchecked and get out of control, really? So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. We're going to be covering a few of these stories and covering folklore and superstition when, again, like I said, left unchecked by rationale, how it can become deadly and devastating to people's lives. So I'm going to check the comments real quick, and then we will move on. Let's see. There we go. I lost my comments there for a second. All right, so Nadine wants to say, happy graduation to my niece and to all the 2022 graduates. Congratulations. So everybody, please give a big congratulations to the graduating party of 2022 over there in Nadine's neck of the woods. And let's see, we've got Hexus in the house. And he says, there be a demon here. Well, you know, I don't think we could function correctly without our resident demon in the house. Joseph or Michael says that he is doing well. We are so glad. And then let's see what we've got going on. And Hexus is feeling better. He said he's feeling much, much better. So we're really, really glad about that. John says, among technicians, there's an almost universal law. You don't say things that are running great. You'll jinx yourself. Exactly. So, you know, even with all our modern technologies and kind of coming out of the age of superstition into the age of, you know, industry and, you know, science and all that kind of thing, it's still there. It's still there. Every single one of us at one point in time, just, do you really want to tempt fate? Do you walk past that penny or do you pick it up? So, you know, it's there. Everybody does it. And then Sherry, the birthday clown, is here. And she says, hello, odd mother. So we are glad you were here, Sherry. So glad to see you. And I think I have gotten caught up on everybody. All right. So let's go ahead and move along. So folklore tales many times illustrate an aspect of family survival in the pre-industrial world. As a peasant family's sustenance frequently depended on the productive labor of each member, and it was difficult to provide for a person who was a permanent drain on the family's scarce resources. A sickly child that would not grow like a normal child, or may have some sort of notable, you know, physical characteristic, which really, now that we're kind of know a little bit more about science and human development and things like that, a lot of those afflictions, a lot of times were due to bad diet, you know, rickets and just all kinds of terrible things, you know, could happen to children just because they didn't have enough vitamins and stuff in their diet. They would often be born with beards or long teeth or, you know, anything like the caul, what they call the caul, which is kind of like an afterbirth that's like over the baby. Like there's a whole bunch of superstition to go along with like birthing cauls and stuff. That's for another story. Now, a child or an adult that displayed intelligence far beyond their apparent years, that could be seen as a threat too, as well as possess uncanny insights or maybe unusual behavior. And this just kind of makes me laugh, such as jumping about, dancing, or playing an instrument. God forbid you jump about, dance, or play an instrument if you were a child. Now, often ravenous appetite was frequently mentioned, indicating that the parents of these unfortunate children saw in their continuing existence a threat to the sustenance of the entire family. This is supporting or supported by some historical evidence that suggests that infanticide was frequently the solution selected. And we can see that in, say, the tales of Hansel and Gretel. sending them out into the woods to get lost. So now today, we of course see this as a ridiculous reason for ancient man to basically, fear all these things to be a real thing, something to be fearful of. But what could help is the fact that folklore could explain it. And for a lot of the reasons that I just gave you, that would explain the dreaded changeling. And of course, superstition also dictated a cure for that. Now, a side note for anybody here in the audience that is not really familiar with what a changeling is, a changeling, also historically referred to as an off or oaf, is a human-like creature found in folklore and folk religion throughout Europe, and a lot of that came over to the States when people started coming over here and immigrating. A changeling was believed to be a fairy in many cases that had been left in place of a human stole by the fairies, and they were supposedly notorious about stealing babies and young children. Now, for instance, several methods were known in Germany specifically to identify a changeling and return the replaced real child. Confusing the changeling by cooking or brewing it in eggshells. So you could cook the child or brew it in eggshells. This would force the changeling to speak, claiming its real age, revealing its position beyond any synchronicity. You could also attempt to heat the changeling in an oven or open fire. Hitting or whipping the changeling might get it to confess. And in German folklore, several possible parents were known for the changelings, like where the changelings came from. And these could be, of course, the devil, old Scratch himself, a female dwarf, a water spirit, a Rodgenmutter, which is also known as the Rye Mother, and she is super interesting, and I'm going to do an episode on her. I really want to get into this with her because it's a super interesting piece of folklore, and you may kind of recognize some Hollywood connections. It is in this case, a demonic woman that lives in the cornfields and steals human children. But of course, most noted for leaving changelings would be the Fae. And this was such as the case of Michael Leahy and Bridget Cleary. These are two 19th century cases reflecting the belief in changelings. Now, in 1826, Anne Roche bathed Michael Leahy, a 4-year-old boy unable to speak or stand. She bathed him 3 times in the Flesk River. He drowned the 3rd time. She swore that she was merely attempting to drive the fairy out of him, and that the jury actually acquitted her of the murder. Now, in 1895, Bridget Cleary was killed by several people, including her husband and cousins, after a long bout of illness. Most likely, she just had a case of pneumonia. Her husband, Michael, attempted to force feed his wife. When that didn't work, he threw her down on the ground before the kitchen fireplace and menaced her with a burning piece of wood. Now, Bridget's chemise caught fire, and Michael then threw lamp oil with kerosene on Bridget. The witnesses were unclear as to whether she was already dead by this point or not. Now, Michael kept the others back from her body as it burned, insisting that she was a changeling and had been for a week previously, and that he would get his wife back from the fairies if he just burnt this one. Now, what kind of started all this was a local storyteller by the name of Jack Dunn, who had originally accused Bridget of being a fairy changeling. Now, it is debatable whether her husband, Michael, actually believed her to be a fairy. Many believe that he concocted the fairy defense after murdering his wife in a fit of rage. Now, the killers were convicted of manslaughter rather than murder, however, as even after the death, they claimed to be convinced that they had killed a changeling and not Bridget Cleary herself. So let's see what's going on in the comments real quick, because I've got a slew of them, and then we're going to keep going. And we may actually get done on time tonight. All right, let's see. And we have Iris here. Hello, Iris. So glad you are here. Let us know where you're from. I believe you are new here in the crypt on the Horror Gallery. Would love to give you a special Mother Delamort welcome. And then John says, you make decisions on what you know. And back then, they didn't know anything. Well, when it came to that kind of stuff, I absolutely agree. I think they may have known more about farming than we do in some cases, but you're absolutely correct, John. You're absolutely correct. And then Sven says and I may pronounce this wrong, Wexenbalg changeling in Germany. Yeah, there's all kinds of changeling stories that you can find. I just picked out just two out of a random thousands that you can find, but there's a lot of really interesting ones. And then Aka says, "Oh wait, those are goblins, but still goblins are fae." Yeah, really, I think it was just personally, it was a way to answer health related scientific questions that they just didn't have the answers to. So therefore, it is human nature to try to blame something or someone. So, but you're absolutely right, Aka. And Sherry, the birthday clown, says it sounds like a delicious dish in the oven or boiling one with eggshells. And then Nadine says that she has a fairy garden. Should I leave gifts for them? Um, it's usually a good idea, and I understand that isn't it honey and cream that they like? I think that's some of their faves. Hi, Calvin. So Calvin is here. We are so glad you're here. He says, "Sorry, I'm late. My mother fell and I was taking care of her." Well, I hope she's okay, Calvin. I really do. And then John says, wow, what country was that? They bought that defense. It was, I think, in this case, I think it was just somewhere in like Northern Europe is what I think. Even though a lot of the superstitions that I covered were German specifically. Let's see. And then Sherry the birthday clown says, it is so true. They persecuted a lot of people back then in the day for health problems. So people like me would be persecuted. Yeah, it's really sad. And I know that, you know, when I was alive and human, I would have. I'm just way too mouthy, way too mouthy. So, and then Hexa says, yes, honey. They like honey. The Fae do. And let's see. Do we have Kenneth in the house? Hi, Kenneth. And then Aka also says rocks. Fairies are attracted to all kinds of shiny stones like agate, quartz, or crystal. Use them to decorate your garden and give the little ones a place to sit. Shiny things, fairies love to look at their reflection. So include shiny things like a mirror or a dish of water in your garden design. That's a good call. Good call, Aka. Absolutely. All right, so let's get a little further into this. Now, folklore was not only a means to explain things we did not understand in the world around us, but it was often used as a guise to hide behind for, shall we say, the less honorable human behaviors, such as greed, control, intolerance, envy. That's just to name a few. Did you have a neighbor you didn't like? Or the farmer down the road that had good soil and a really nice piece of land? Or what about that person born with a certain physical affliction? Or the midwife whose cures and birthing skills often were much, much better or showed better results than what the local church or town doctor could offer? Or maybe that old widow spinster hermit on the edge of town? Well, good for you. Superstition had a remedy for that too. And this is where we are going to cover the Malleus Maleficarum. It is thought by many to be one of the most evil books composed by man. Now, the Malleus Maleficarum, or loosely translated, the Hammer of the Witches, is technically a witch hunting manual written in 1486 by Henrik Kramer, who was an inquisitioner for the Catholic Church. Now, it was first published in Germany, where there it was known as Der Hexenhammer in 1487. The work also had alleged approval and endorsement from the University of Cologne, which was a prestigious German university of the time, an endorsement that was very likely forged by Kramer, many historians think. Now, the book is extremely misogynistic. Though it acknowledges that both men and women can be witches, it encourages the use of torture to extract confessions in ways that were not actually legal under the laws of the Inquisition. The chief crimes witches were accused of in the Malleus Maleficarum are the working of evil magic and making, of course, a deal with the devil in order to obtain their powers. Now, women were especially targeted, as it professed that women were more susceptible to the devil due to our more carnal nature. Now, oddly enough, some of the most frequent crimes, though, that these sex-crazed sirens are accused of is stealing men's penises and causing impotency. However, baby killing and cannibalism were also popular witch practices, often being committed together. Now, the Malleus Maleficarum is divided into 3 separate parts: the nature of witches, the harm that they do, and the best way to prosecute them. And I actually have a copy myself. And I actually looked through this the other night when I was laying in my coffin. And I wanted to read a story that I thought was hilarious. Let's see. That's if I can find it. All right, let's see if I can read this little bitty print. And this is how, as it were, they deprive man of their viral members. So in other words, this, I believe, is the second part, and it just tells you how some witches operate. And it's so funny because, like, you can see just the beginnings of like actual law and order, because with any type of law, you usually have precedent. And precedent is where a particular law has been applied to some sort of crime or what have you situation. And it's been found, I'm just kind of generalizing, been found in a court of law to really kind of fit the bill. That's how they're going to prosecute certain crimes under a certain prosecutorial law. So in the case of the Malleus Maleficarum, however, if some pious person had a witch story they could tell, then far be it from anyone to question that, from their mouth to God's ears, I guess. But anyway, so how, as it were, that witches deprive man of his viral member. We have already shown that they can take away the male organ, not indeed by actually disposing the human body of it, but by concealing it with glamour, in the manner in which we have already declared. And of this we shall instance a few examples. In the town of Ratsbahn, a certain young man who had an intrigue with a girl wishing to leave her lost his member. That is to say, some glamour was cast over it so that he could not see or touch nothing but his smooth body. It was gone. In his worry over this, he went to the tavern to drink wine. And after he sat there for a while, he got into conversation with another woman who was there and told her the cause of his sadness. I have lost my penis. Explaining everything and demonstrating in his body or with his body that it was so. So in other words, I guess he tried to show her his penis that wasn't there. I don't know. The woman was astute and asked whether he suspected anyone. And when he named such a one, unfolding the whole matter, she said, "If persuasion is not enough, and you must use some violence to induce her to restore you to your health." So in the evening, the young man watched the way by which the witch was in the habit of going. So in other words, basically the girl he wanted to break up with. And finding her, prayed her to restore him to the health of his body. And when she maintained that she was innocent and knew nothing about what he was talking about, he fell upon her and, winding a towel tightly around her neck, choked her, saying, "Unless you give me back my health, you shall die at my hands." Then she, being unable to cry out, and with her face already swelling and growing black, said, "Let me go, and I will heal you." The young man then relaxed the pressure of the towel, and the witch touched him with her hand between his thighs, saying, "Now you have what you desire." And the young man, as he afterwards said plainly, felt before that he had been verified it that it had been verified, and he verified it by looking and touching it, that his member had been restored to him by the mere touch of a witch. So it's just it's it's interesting how silly humankind can be. In this particular copy of the Malleus Maleficarum, I believe this is like the 1928 version, which is the Dover edition. It's a little bit more white bread, or they've cut out some really bad things. So you probably want to look for, if you really want to find a copy that's a little bit more true to the original Malleus Maleficarum, something before the Dover edition, because during that time, they just kind of censored it down. Is what I'm trying to say. So, so let's see what's going on here in the chats real quick. Let's see. Wow, everybody's so chatty. Hi, Melissa. How are you? So glad you're back. All right, and so Akash says, wait, they were so horny they would steal penises and make men sterile? Makes sense. Oh my goodness. Let's see. And then Sven says, she can read. Burn her! Burn her! She's a witch. And then Melissa says, my favorite spell. And then Sherry, the birthday clown, says, so he had a sex change without him knowing it. I think probably, honestly, what it was, I think he'd probably been at the tavern for quite a long time that day and probably has such bad double vision, he just couldn't see his penis. Either that or it's... And then Stephen P. Kitty Cat says, the witch turned me into a Ken doll. Yes, John. Poof, it was gone. Nadine says this is too funny. I know, you just read some of this stuff and it's just, you can't help but giggle, which is horrifying, because if you look in the third chapter, which is the last part of the book, these poor people, regardless of whether you're male or female, you really had no way out. You really had no way out. You could tell that the Inquisitioners took every effort for the judges not to feel any type of humanity for these people. In many cases, the witches had to walk in backwards, so that they couldn't look the judges in the eyes. So that would, it's kind of like like you see in the movies, kind of like making somebody turn their back on you before you kill them or something. You don't want to look in their eyes. So, they just really had everything ended in, you're going to be passed down to the Inquisition court, and hopefully they'll find you guilty, and you'll be given death. Of course, that was after all the torture. Let's see. And then Hexa says, and all I got was this lousy toy Corvette. Yes, Akash, she turned me into a newt. Dim penis stealing witches, Sven says. And then Steven says, restore my junk, vile enchantress. Oh my goodness. I know, it's hilarious. It's hilarious. All right, so some interesting information, or statistics, and I did find this at www.science.smith.edu. Now, throughout the 16th and 17th century, witch trials and the persecution and punishment of suspected witches were common in Europe. Between 1560 and 1630, there was a surge in the number of accusations of witchcraft and witchcraft trials that was referred to at the time as the Great Hunt. Now, during this time, a minimal estimate would be between about 80,000 to 100,000 people were accused of witchcraft, and of them, at the minimum, 40,000 were killed as punishment. And again, some say that those numbers are much, much higher. Now, in some cases, whole villages would succumb to this fate. And you saw some really, really brutal ones in Germany and France, noting that basically, like I said, the whole village would succumb to the fate, noting that the greasy black soot from the people being burned stuck to every structure in the building, in the village. Now, this search in witch trials also interestingly coincided with some of the most bitter phases of what we refer to as the Little Ice Age. It was a period of widespread cooling and a drop in average global temperatures around the time of 1300 to 1850. Colder, harsher weather of the Little Ice Age caused a series of crises, including poor crop harvests, the Great Famine, and of course, the Great Pestilence, or better known as the Black Death or bubonic plague in Europe. People looked for any explanation for the struggles they were facing and often blamed witches, sometimes at the encouragement of religious leaders. One such was the Würzburg witch trials of 1625 to 1631 in what is known as present-day Germany. It is one of the biggest mass trials and mass executions ever seen in Europe, and one of the biggest witch trials in history. It resulted in the execution of hundreds of people of all ages, sexes, and classes, all of whom were burned at the stake, sometimes having been beheaded first, sometimes being burned alive. 157 men, women, and children in the city of Würzburg were confirmed to have been executed. 219 were estimated to have been executed in the city proper, and an estimated 900 were executed or died in custody. The witch trials took place during the ongoing religious 30 Years' War between the Protestants and the Catholics, in an area of the religious border between Catholic and Protestant territories, and were conducted, of course, by a Catholic prince bishop intending on introducing the counter-reformation in his territory. However, the notorious witch hunter Matthew Hopkins, and in his book, The Discovery of Witches, would become the spiritual successor to the Malleus Maleficarum, bringing the witch craze to the New England colonies with the Salem witch trials using Hopkins' methodology. And I'm going to, what time is it? I think we'll probably stop for a quick break real quick, and then we'll get to the comments. I can't help but dance a little bit. That's just such a snappy little rhythm. All right, so let's see what's going on in the comments real quick, and then we're going to get into the Salem witch trials a little bit. So, all right, then Sherry, the birthday clown, says they would either drown them, and if they floated, they were a witch, and if they sank, they were human, or they would torture their toes. Yeah, it's so weird that with a lot of the torture methods, in order to, like, it all ended in death. It all ended in death. I sometimes wonder if you might have not just been better off to say, "Yep, I'm a witch," and just bypassed all that, because you were going to die either way, you know. So, and then Melissa says burning or hanging. Yep. Even though I did read an interesting piece of historical information stating that at first, before they really, really got brutal, at first they actually would either strangle or slit their throats prior to burning them. The whole burning alive, or at least in certain parts of Europe, I don't think happened till a little bit later. So probably more at the height of the we had satanic panic, they had witch panic. So at the height of the witch trials, probably they probably got to their most brutal. And then John says, how many women would use the power if they had it? I think you probably could ask any human, if a human had that kind of power, how many would use that power? Would you use it for good or for ill? I don't know. You know, there's a real dark side to us humans. So I guess it's like with anything, but it is a good question. It is a good question. And so Mikey's in the house. Hey, Mikey, so glad you're here. All right, and then Sherry, the birthday clown, again says, wow, that's kind of creepy. And I thought the British were creepy. They would try to drown them or throw them off a cliff to see if they flew like a witch. Yeah, it's crazy. It's really crazy. Exactly. Sherry also says, wow, could you just imagine the smell? Yeah, it's awful. It's, and I was just about to say that, Finn. It's my mass uh, psychosis. Um, you know, from the black mother corn, yes, or the wheat. Many also play a role in this. Also, it was common to put psychoactive shrooms in beer that could lead to a bad trip. That makes sense. That makes sense. They believe that, I don't, it's been a while. I really need to go back and revisit it, but I did a 3-part series. Gosh, Hexus was about 2 years ago, on the Great Pestilence. And it's on our YouTube channel if you want to go check it out. A lot of really interesting information, but you know, not only was all this stuff going on with the bubonic plague, and you just see people just, you know, almost like The Walking Dead, where people were just dead, laying everywhere, you know, and you know, you couldn't touch them, but they really believed that there were several different diseases that were traveling together with the pestilence. Not only that, but as Sven kind of brings up, due to the Great Famine, a lot of the wheats and corns and things like that were most likely infected with. There's a lot of different kinds of molds and funguses and things like that it can make you see things. So could you imagine going through that, and you're also like tripping balls the whole time? It'd be horrifying. It'd be absolutely horrifying. Makes sense though with a lot of the weird art that came out of the Black Plague years. And then John says, I'm glad it's modern times. Yeah, I'm glad we can cure a lot of that stuff today. And for most people that don't, I mean, if you don't know, we actually do have up to 15 cases of the bubonic plague here in the United States every year, mostly out west for our west folks out there. So if you ever see signs in the woods that say stay on the path or don't touch dead animals, that's probably why. Let's see. And then Sherry, the birthday clown, says the bubonic plague, and sometimes they blamed women. Absolutely. Because, you know, a lot of these witch hunts kind of coincided with all the horrible things that were going on during that tiny ice age period. There was a lot of factors that went into the bubonic plague that I didn't even really realize until I started doing like a deep dive on it. Really interesting stuff. Really interesting stuff. You know, a lot of people say that it was migrated with the black rat. And there's some evidence now that it may have been actually, what was it? Gerbils. Because in a lot of areas, in the trail that the bubonic plague took, coming out of like Mongolia and stuff like that, there were a lot of wild gerbils, and the pestilus flea, I forget the Latin term for it, preferred them actually over rats, I do believe, if I remember correctly. And then Hexa says that's where the Swiss got LSD from, is from corn mold. Yes. Mother Nature, she has her, she's just amazing. Just some of the things that you can find. All right, so let's get back to where we were. Let's see. Okay, so we were talking about we're moving across the big pond. So the members of Salem, being Puritans, of course, followed a strict religion that overflowed into their governance. Their religion required them to cleanse their town of evil whenever it was discovered. This was another responsibility every single citizen believed they had. However, not all people involved had pure intentions. The majority of the accusers gained an advantage from the imprisonment of a fellow community member, whether it be because of land, wealth, or just simply vengeance. The interesting thing about Salem, however, is that although the deaths were inexcusable, there was an attempt to use the judicial system, allowing the accused to stand before a jury and declare their innocence. Not that it did any good, but at least they tried. However, other towns in the area elected to take matters into their own hands. Such was the case of the Witch of Hadley. Now, Mary Reeve Webster was a woman living in Hadley, Maine, with her husband, William Webster. Most would say that they were definitely not the town's welcome wagon, but the couple mostly kept to themselves. However, Mary, according to the stories, had a very bad temper that would flare up when aroused. This, mixed with a few oddities, made her stand out from the crowd. She wasn't exactly the most popular person in town. Over time, these oddities led to rumors that she was a witch. Townsfolk came up with stories saying that she controlled cattle, and in one story in particular, it is said Mary entered the home of a friend. While there, a chicken fell through the chimney into a pot of boiling water. The chicken, although hurt, escaped. But what they thought was strange, or so the story goes, however, is that the next morning there were scalded marks all over Mary. God forbid she may have been too close to the pot of water that the chicken supposedly fell into. It could have splashed her, causing her to get scalded. But of course, that would make no sense. She must have been the chicken. And they say it was in the same place the chicken got injured. Now, people claim that Mary was supernatural, and they soon began to blame her for any instance that happened in town. The accusations grew so large that in 1683, she was arrested, brought to Boston, and tried as a witch. Thankfully, however, this jury was able to see through the madness, and Mary was declared innocent. When Mary returned to town, a man by the name of Philip Smith became gravely ill. Now, Mr. Smith was a prominent figure in society, holding many roles and having many friends in the town. Smith had come down with a very high fever and began to suffer multiple seizures. He claimed that he was unable to move his arms and that he was being held down by a greater force. Of course, a few of his friends assumed that it must be Mary who was behind the doings, and they planned to prove it. One man kept watch while the others went to pester Mary, knocking on her door and ransacking her home. When they arrived back to check on Smith, Smith claimed that he had felt an ease over the last hour. This apparently was enough evidence for the men to take the matters into their own hands even further. That night, the men went to Mary's home while her husband was away, dragged her out into the snow, beat her, and then took a rope, slung it over a tree, and hung her to death. After they cut her body down, they dragged it over into the woods, rolled it in snow, and then buried it under a pile of snow, which probably saved her life. The next morning, when they came to check on Smith, they found him dead. His body was covered in bruises, and he had small cuts on his back. His face and chest were swollen, and the corpse still felt warm. The men were more confused than ever, and what they also didn't know is that Mary had survived the encounter. And she would eventually go on to live another 11 years before dying of natural causes. Locals wondered if she could die even at all, but nobody dared question her any longer out of fear. After her death, Mary Webster was buried in the Old Hadley Cemetery. One of Mary's descendants, Margaret Atwood, who is a famous author, wrote the poem Half Hanged Mary. The last line of the poem best describes, I would think, the feelings of Mary after they had attempted to murder her. And it states, "Before I was not a witch, but now I am one." However, this would not be the only piece of folklore that would turn out to be, or however, there would be one piece of folklore that would turn out to be the proverbial fly in the ointment when it came to certain aspects of superstition that simply had, at first, no real dictation on how it should be handled. It was pretty much like, I don't know what we're supposed to do about this particular piece of folklore. The first recorded instance of werewolfery occurred in Poligny, France in 1521. There, authorities accused a Michael Verdum of lycanthropy after wolves killed several locals. Verdum, who, of course, after a lengthy torture session, confessed to being a werewolf, along with two of his companions, a Pierre Bourgot and a Philibert Montot. Though many of the shapeshifters were clearly mentally ill, soon accusations of lycanthropy were rampant across France and the rest of the European continent. Many of them, including that of Frenchman Jacques Roulet, involved tales of transformational salve. We've all heard of the witch, there's witch ointment, but there's also transformational salves for like werewolves and stuff, along with pelts and different things like that. The problem, however, with werewolves is the church simply did not know how to deal with lycanthropy because it had no real biblical reference. Roulette, incidentally, was found feeble-minded and was sent to the 16th century equivalent of a psychiatric hospital. However, many others didn't fare as well. When several claimed that the devil had provided them with a special ointment that they could rub on themselves in order to transform and then, of course, murder and eat children, the church then had something to work with. Starting in the 16th century and lasting through the 18th, Europe would see a string of werewolf trials that would put America's witch trials to shame. Often being accused of Satanism, they would be tortured, mutilated, and worse. And I've covered this particular story before, and maybe eventually we'll revisit it, but such was the case of Peter Stube. Peter Stube, or also known to some as Peter Stubb, was a German man that claimed that Satan gifted him with a belt that allowed him to shapeshift for the sake of murder. He was executed by having his skin flayed or ripped from his body, arms and legs broken on the wheel, and eventually his head removed before, of course, his body was burned. But there is one case in particular that would turn the Inquisition on their head. And this is a really cool story. But let's see what's going on in the comments real quick. And then Sherry the Clown, the birthday clown says, so think of all those gerbils you collect. Just be careful. That's the same as the, is it the chinchillas? There for a while you couldn't find chinchillas because I believe certain types, and don't take it with a grain of salt, but I had read somewhere one time that I believe chinchillas can carry the, is it the hantavirus, which is like a hemorrhagic fever. And then Sven says, also a handy way for the Catholics to get rid of the wise women in the Germanic tribes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Sherry the Birthday Clown says, my cousin went to Salem. She said it was beautiful and brilliant. Yes, it is a very, very cool place. A very, very cool place. And if you ever have the chance to go, of course, you do want to spend one day in the village proper, but make sure that you check out the old cemeteries where a lot of the witches were buried. The headstones are absolutely beautiful. And go to Gallows Hill, where a lot were hanged, sadly. And then Hexa says, it was me holding him down. He owed me money and I was trying to collect. I see how things got a little out of hand. Sorry, Smith. And then Sherry the Birthday Clown says, they would probably get me. My family comes from pagan lifestyle and the Druids. I don't think anybody was safe, to be very honest with you, Sherry, because really at one point it almost came to, I've got to point the finger at this person to keep somebody from pointing the finger at me, which is really sad because we've seen this happen through history. This is not anything new. It's not anything old. It's unfortunately part of human nature, and we see it even to this day. When you have one group try to demoralize another group as if they are less than human. It's really sad. It's the same problem. It's just in new wrapping paper. And then Sherry, the Birthday Clown, says all those people like me that had learning disabilities or split personality disorders, or had were left-handed. It could be something as simple as that, being left-handed, or having seizures. There were just so many things that could unfortunately cause people to point fingers. And then Stephen P. Kitty Cat says, I shot a werewolf once, but by the time I got to it, it had already transformed back into my neighbor's dog. And then Hexa says, drop my ointment and my shape-shifting belt and been looking for it for centuries now. Well, we know who had it, at least for a little while. All right, so we're going to round out tonight with probably my favorite story in all this. So like I said, there was one case in particular that would turn the Inquisition on their head. Now, historically, one of the most extraordinary werewolf trials in history took place in rural Livonia, present-day Latvia, in the late 17th century. The defendant, an elderly 80-year-old peasant known as Old Thies, and it's short for Matthias, so it's probably Thies instead of Thias. I don't know. Anyway, Thies. We're going to call him Thies. He astonished the court by freely admitting that he was a werewolf and was proud of it. And I quote, when Old Thies stepped forward to deliver his testimony after all witnesses had been heard, he was confronted with this accusation. He confessed without any hesitation that he had previously been a werewolf, but after some time, approximately 10 years ago, he had been rid of it. He retired. Why, do you ask, would anyone in their right mind make such a claim in a time period of witch hunts, where those found to be serving the devil would be burned at the stake or worse? And they were just devastatingly cruel in the werewolf trials. They were much worse in most cases than the witch trials. However, Thies claimed that, werewolves were not monsters or agents of the devil, but rather they were benevolent creatures of God. He called them the hounds of God. Their souls would ascend to heaven when they died, and they were in the favor of God and worked tirelessly to defend the souls of the earth with God's blessings of the werewolf gift. The werewolves would bravely descend into the very depths of hell to do battle with the demons and the witches, preventing them from escaping into this world to wreak havoc upon the earth. He claimed that when the hounds of God failed to keep the witches and the demons in hell, that was what would happen or would be the cause of bad crops that season. and that when the werewolves succeeded, that is when crops flourished. If it were not for the hounds of God, he said, this world would be overrun with demons and witches who would cause all mortals to endure unspeakable suffering. Thies was determined in his confession, defying that he had ever signed a pact with the devil. He even refused to see the parish priest who was sent for to chastise him, saying that he, Thies, was a better man than any prince. He claimed he was neither the first nor would he be the last man to become a werewolf in order to fight the witches. Finally, the judges, probably out of desperation, sentenced Thies to 10 lashes for acts of idolatry, worshiping idols, can't even speak tonight, and superstitious beliefs. And that is the end of that story. So he got away with basically a slap on the wrist because they didn't want to make a martyr out of him. And smart man, very, very smart man. So let's see what's going on in the comments. And then I do believe I will be bidding you a pleasant nightmares. And then Hexa says, to be honest, werewolf was also a term for a serial killer back then as well, because even though in a time of great death, these people couldn't fathom someone killing for fun. Yeah, but you know, it goes back to that subject that we're going to cover in the podcast, which I find so freaking interesting. What better place to be if you were a serial killer than in a position such as Inquisition, or maybe the left-hand man of somebody really powerful, to be able to carry out your dastardly deeds. So yeah, I mean, we understand it now, you know, that people that kill for fun, basically, or to, you know, satisfy some sort of weird internal need, have probably always been around. And people in general were much more cruel, I do believe, back in history. You know, when you have public hangings, and it would be like a freaking circus, you know, there'd be vendors and all kinds of people there. So yeah, it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around. So, but I hope you enjoyed that. That was a lot of fun to kind of bring together and research. And so I don't know what I'll be doing next time, but it'll be a good one, I promise you. And if you have suggestions, you're more than welcome to submit them to us. And if there's not a lot on a particular you know, topic, then maybe we can work it into, you know, more of like this horror suit type stuff. Because I like doing these, a bunch of little short ones too. It kind of, you know, keeps you moving. So, but I had a really good time. I hope you enjoyed it. And please share, guys. Like I said, that is the best way to support us streamers, is to share our content and to get our stuff out there. And it's absolutely free. Also, don't forget to check out our websites. You can even subscribe to our YouTube from the website. So yeah, check us out. Most definitely join us in the conversation over on Discord. You can find links on our website as well for Discord. All right, and pleasant nightmares, everybody. Later. I don't know, set the world higher. I was once of a baby. In life I have known